All right. Looks like the pace of people joining has slowed, and we're a few minutes in. So let's get started. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you taking time this evening to join us for our fifth Policy Advisory Committee for the Downtown Congestion Pricing Study and our second full pack meeting that is virtual. So appreciate having you take your time to do this. My name is Colin Dentalpost. I'm the project manager for the study. And hopefully we will have had some more practice this time. And so there will be fewer likelihood or less likelihood for glitches, but please do bear with us if there is given all the technology we're relying on here to connect us. So I'll just quickly go over the agenda here. So the idea is we will start by just going over a few logistics, and Paige will give us a refresher on using Zoom in case anyone needs that. Then the main focus of today's meeting is going to be on sharing the work we've been doing, and we sent you some of the findings we have from analysis of a range of different congestion pricing scenarios. So we'll be sharing that, and then that'll be a big discussion item, and we'll have breakout sessions and lots of opportunity to talk about that in depth and hear your input and how we should move forward from here. And then we'll also get some updates on outreach work today and also our plans for moving forward given the pandemic with outreach and how we're planning to do that, and get any other thoughts you have there. And then lastly, there will be a couple of opportunities for public comment, once at the end of the scenarios item and again at the end of the meeting. So we'll have opportunities, you'll have a minute to give verbal comment, and you can also submit questions to us or thoughts to us as well. So that is the overview of how we'll plan to move forward here. So just as a note, we are recording this meeting so that we can post it for anybody who is interested later. And we've also muted everyone by default, so we'll unmute people when we call on you to speak. I'll be facilitating the meeting, and we have some various support from our team, and we'll do introductions shortly. But please do feel free to chat Abe Bingham. And I think, Abe, if you want to just add tech to your name, that might help people remember that you are the person to chat if you have any technical challenges as we go forward, and Abe can use his wizardry to help you sort those out. Please note that if you chat me, that's probably not the best way to get your questions answered because I'll be facilitating, and so I can't, it's unlikely you'll get a prompt response. And let's see, so if you direct those to Abe or Paige also, that would be great. And you can download today's agenda and meeting materials on our website calendar at sfcta.org/pack5. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paige to talk a little bit more about how we'll be using Zoom.
Colin, and I'm not sure that I see your screen. Is that true for others?
Well, that's probably because I need to share it. So sorry about that, folks. It looks big on my screen, but that doesn't help you all. Okay, well, probably no big loss. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, take it away.
Great, thanks, Colin. So just quick little Zoom primer for anyone who's new. If you're tuning in to Zoom on your computer, you can view meeting participants and the chat by clicking on these buttons in the dashboard right here. Next slide. And you can also, on that same dashboard, view the buttons to mute and unmute yourself, as well as show video. And if you're on your phone, you can dial *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Next slide. And the red arrow shows how you can raise your hand. You can also potentially see the raise hand button as part of your chat box. And if you are on your phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand to speak. And we would advise PAC members, if you're tuning in via computer, to right-click your name on the participant box and update it with your name and your organization. And members of the public are welcome to do that as well. And then there will be 2 opportunities for members of the public to provide feedback during the meeting, during public comment. Once will be after the screening results are shared, and again at the end of the meeting. And as a note, during our last meeting, we had some use of inappropriate language in the chat, so we have turned off the public chat. And we encourage you to provide public comment verbally by raising your hand during public comment periods. You can also submit comments via chat to the project staff, and those comments will be added to the record for this meeting. And if you're having trouble, you can chat Abe or me in the chat if possible. And you can also text the number on the screen and we can help you. And now I'll hand it back to Colin for some introductions.
Great, thanks. So we have a number of Transportation Authority staff here. So again, I'm Colin Dentalpost and I'm the project manager for the study. And you just heard from Paige Miller, who's on our communications team. I will ask other folks to introduce themselves. Abe and Drew, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Abe. I'm the graphic designer at the SFCTA, and you can chat me any tech questions that you have.
And I'm Drew Cooper. I'm in our Technology Data and Analysis group, and I will be presenting our scenario analysis results today.
I'm Rachel Hyatt, Assistant Deputy Director for Planning at SFCTA.
I'm Priyati Ahmed. I am a Transportation Planner here at SFCTA.
And Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Eric Young. I'm in communications here at the Transportation Authority.
And then we also have several folks from our consultant team here to help out. So Brooke, Julia, and Paisley, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Brooke Staten with Reflex Design Collective. I'm an outreach facilitator.
Hi, I'm Julia Kahn. I'm also doing the outreach and some facilitation.
Hi, I'm Paisley Strelitz from Civic Edge, and we're also supporting on outreach.
Great. So that is the team, and we have so many people in part so that we can have great breakout sessions and have hopefully good facilitators and notes. So we'll be, you'll all be chatting with many of us. So next we can have PAC members introduce yourselves. I think the chat window is probably the best way to do that. So PAC members, please go ahead and introduce yourselves, and you can note your organization as well in the chat window. So Paige, let us know when you opened that up.
It's ready.
Great. So the chat window is open just for people to introduce themselves. So please go ahead and do that, PAC members. And if you're a PAC member and you've called in without a computer, please press *9 so you can raise your hand, and then I will call on you and you can introduce yourself that way. And then I will just pause for a minute so that PAC members can all introduce themselves. And of course, it's hard to keep up with this chat window now. But it's great to see all of you here. And I think that's everybody that I saw. And I haven't seen anyone raise their hand. So welcome, everyone. Really appreciate, again, you joining us and helping us shape
Colin,
this study. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think Robin has raised his hand.
Oh, great. Sorry about that. I missed it. I can. I am not able to unmute Robin. Paige or Abe, are you able to?
Let me try. How's that?
Great. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay, so I'm Robin Levitt from Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, also Market Octavia Citizens Advisory Committee.
Great. Thanks, Robin, and thanks, Drew, for flagging the hand raise. Okay. Well, again, thanks, everyone, and appreciate having you here. So at this point, I think it's best for us to just jump into it. So I'm going to hand it over to Drew to get us started with the scenario analysis discussion.
There we go. When you start sharing, your unmuting options move to a different place. Anyway, thanks, Colin. Hopefully, you all will recall last meeting where we introduced our plans for our scenario screening process, where we would basically use a 3-round process to explore a wide range of program design options and then iteratively refine them and end up with a smaller set of high-performing alternatives. With everything that we analyzed, the goal was to reduce peak period car trips downtown by at least 15% from the peak levels reached in 2019. We started with the kind of basic program design, looking at these 5 core configurations. The first one, peak direction pricing, would charge people who are driving inbound in the morning and outbound in the evening. Inbound pricing would charge people who are driving inbound both in the morning and in the evening. Bidirectional pricing would charge both directions. Area pricing build on this by also charging trips that happen entirely within the zone. And finally, vehicle miles traveled would place a per mile fee on trips that happen in the zone. The question that we asked with each of these configurations was, what is the right transaction price that will get you to that 15% vehicle trip reduction? And so that transaction price is displayed in the boxes on screen here. Inbound pricing has the highest per transaction price, but it's also unique among all of these options in that you're likely to only pay it once a day, if at all. Whereas with the others, if you're driving, you're much more likely to incur multiple charges. And so as those charges add up, you actually end up paying more. We early on removed VMT, vehicle miles traveled pricing, because our research indicated that there isn't currently a good technology to implement this that would be available to everybody and that wouldn't come with privacy concerns. And so we decided not to move that forward. Peak direction pricing, when you look a little bit deeper at that, it has a kind of a little bit of a quirk where you have, for example, a group of people who are traveling into the zone in the morning and then leaving at night. And they end up paying quite a lot because they get dinged twice. And so they would end up paying $15 a day if they're making both of their trips in the peak period. At the same time, you've got people who are starting off in the zone in the morning, leaving and then coming back. And this group of people is also contributing congestion to a crowded network, but they're not paying anything. So this configuration creates a kind of arbitrary set of winners and losers when we actually want to be a little bit more targeted in in who pays and what amount they pay. Program costs are an important element of evaluating these alternatives. So we built up program costs to include things like the equipment that would be required, the staffing and other infrastructure that would be required to process transactions and so on. And that revealed some pretty big differences between these alternatives. So on this chart, the costs that we estimated are shown in the kind of salmon bar at the top. And so what you'll see here is that inbound pricing is the least expensive of these options because it has the lowest equipment requirements and the fewest transactions that need to be processed. Peak direction and bidirectional pricing both have more equipment requirements because now all around this cordon you have to have sensors pointing in both directions. And area pricing finally has the highest costs because in addition to all of the infrastructure required for peak direction and bidirectional pricing, you also need additional infrastructure built interior to the zone to detect trips that are happening inside. So we dropped for the time consideration of area pricing because it was both the highest cost and the least cost effective because it lost the highest amount of its revenue to program costs. We also decided not to move forward with peak direction pricing because of the flaw that I described a little bit earlier. And so we wanted to take inbound pricing and bidirectional pricing a little bit further to explore the differences there. Now, when we surveyed other congestion pricing programs throughout the world, we found that the costs that we estimated relative to the revenue are kind of on the low side of the range that you could observe in other places. And out of a desire to be conservative with estimating the amount of revenue that we might have to put towards investments, we looked at places like London and Milan, which ended up spending about 55% of their revenue on program costs. And so that is the basis of what we use in subsequent rounds of analysis. So the first thing that we looked at was the impact of these configurations on people's costs who are traveling downtown. Unsurprisingly, congestion pricing is expected to increase costs to people traveling downtown. But you can see that the bidirectional pricing scheme increases costs quite a bit more. And I'll note that all of this is without any discounts and exemptions so far, which are considered in a later round. Similarly, both of these alternatives, because they were designed to reduce vehicle trips by 15%, achieve that goal. They both disproportionately reduce trips among lower income people who are reducing their driving more. But this imbalance is exaggerated a little bit more with the bidirectional pricing scheme. So from this, we concluded that the inbound cordon was the best performing of these core configurations because it meets the 15% vehicle trip reduction target while keeping the lowest daily costs to people traveling downtown. It would start off requiring an $8.50 fee per crossing and has the lowest capital and operating costs. And finally, this configuration, as well as all of the other ones, without any driving discounts, would disproportionately reduce driving trips among lower income people. So we'll focus on inbound cordon pricing for the remainder of the analysis that we're going to present. In round two, we looked at investments, focusing on transit investments. And we found that implementing congestion pricing without increasing transit service leads to a transit crowding problem. But that problem, which extends to both the bus and the rail network, can be alleviated by increasing bus service by 20 to 25%. Reducing transit service beyond that has some additional benefits for transit crowding, but it doesn't lead to very much additional mode shift away from driving. The inbound cordon scenario generates enough revenue to cover this amount of transit investment and also leaves some left over for either additional transit service or other priorities. So we moved this level of transit funding forward as the basis for our consideration of driving discounts and exemptions. So the core alternatives considered here are a no discounts alternative, which is presented mainly for comparison, moderate discounts, which are a 50% discount for low income and 50% discount for very low income drivers, and what we've called the more discounts package, which expands the very low income driver discount to 100%. Both of these discount packages require that the base fee that everyone else pays gets increased to $10 or $12 respectively in order to continue hitting that 15% vehicle trip reduction goal. Now, again, without discounts, the vehicle trip reduction is coming disproportionately from lower income drivers. By applying the moderate level of discounts, we kind of flatten that distribution out, so it's coming a little bit more evenly from folks across the income spectrum. And with the higher level of discounts, you actually can reverse that trend so that more reductions in driving are coming out of the moderate, middle, and high income groups. Now we looked at costs, and in particular, cost as a percent of income. And for the very low, people in the very low income group, this is a pretty high amount of money that is spent on direct out-of-pocket transportation costs relative to their income. But even with the people in the low income group, they're still spending significantly more as a percent of their income on transportation than people in the high income group. So now we're going to look at the effect of the congestion pricing scenario, the inbound cordon pricing scenario on travel costs for people that travel downtown. And the results might seem a little counterintuitive at first. So what you see is that for most people, costs are expected to go up, which is intuitive, but the magnitude is pretty small. And that's because in this first slide, we're looking at all travelers downtown, not just drivers. And so the one group that kind of sticks out here are very low income folks who, even with no discounts, their transportation costs go down. And this is really because they're getting pushed out of driving at greater rates than others are. With the moderate discount package, now you have folks in this group more willing to drive, and so their change in cost is closer to neutral. And with the higher discount package, very low income folks are saving a bit more money because their driving costs haven't increased and because they're also able to benefit from some of the transit service improvements. And folks in other income groups, they see their travel costs tick up a little bit. Now, naturally, if we look just at people that are driving downtown, their costs are going to be higher than the total population of people who are traveling downtown. although not quite as high as you might expect. And this is for a couple of reasons. A lot of people are carpooling and sharing rides with other people. And also a lot of people are traveling outside of the peak periods. So from all of this, we determined that an income-based driving discount would effectively keep costs from changing for people in the two lowest income groups that we looked at. That would lead to a base price increase of up to a total of $10 to $12, depending on the package, but that the congestion pricing program could generate enough revenue to sufficiently cover these discounts and fund the necessary levels of transit. And higher levels of discounts would result in a more equitable distribution of changes in driving. So we're proposing that we would move forward both of these discount packages. We also looked at a set of other discounts. Some of these can be easily accommodated, but others have some trade-offs. Starting off, a maximum daily charge of 2 times the transaction price could be implemented with a pretty minimal effect on the program because it's unlikely for people to be incurring a charge 2 or more times. So that set of people that this would apply to is relatively small. A discount for zone residents would likely lead to a further increase in the base price, which we estimate would go up to about $13, and would also cut into some of the revenue that's available for other subsidies. So this could also be accommodated, but might come with trade-offs relative to some of these other priorities. A $1 bridge toll rebate, which was recommended by the 2010 study, would likely benefit higher income drivers, but is of moderate cost and could also likely be accommodated with trade-offs. Transit discounts, which were popular in some of our outreach work, may fit in if they're narrower, but bigger discounts and for larger groups of people run the risk of exceeding the amount of revenue that we estimate to have available. And finally, discounts for drivers we think are appropriate, and we're working on further analysis to determine what an appropriate program for drivers with disabilities would look like. And with that, I will hand it over to, I believe, Paige.
I will actually kick this section off. So let me share my screen to realize I was insufficiently prepared to do. So what we wanted to, before we start with into the discussion of these results, we also wanted to update you all on some of the feedback we've heard so far in the outreach we've been doing in the meantime. We have a lot more outreach to do, and we'll talk a little more in the next agenda item about outreach that's still coming. But as you know, we did several co-creation workshops before the pandemic started. And we've also heard requests from different stakeholder groups for presentations. And so we thought it would be useful to be thinking also about the feedback we've heard so far as we've been talking about congestion pricing and different ideas for you to consider as we're talking about these results. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Reflex design folks to talk through the co-creation piece of feedback.
Great, thanks, Colin. Yeah, so just to summarize the co-creation work that we did beforehand and be able to share a little bit about the preliminary findings. We held 3 workshops before the pandemic spread here in Tenderloin, Excelsior, and Bayview. So, and so that was 3 out of the 12 workshops that we're going to be doing. We just did one in Visitation Valley today. And so this is bringing together folks who are residents of these areas. We're looking primarily at low-income communities of color to co-design the policy itself. And we have about 8 more of these to do, and you can do next slide if you want. So the bulk of the workshop itself, they're playing a game that we created where they are picking which subsidies and discounts they want to see incorporated, which investments they want to see in the final design, as well as what is the fee level. And so they would pick their subsidy cards, for example, like a low-income driver discounts. They would pick which types of investments they want. So for example, transit improvements. And then they would figure out which fee they would want. And so we've translated the kind of trade-offs that a planner would have to think about, especially budget-wise, into a token system. So each card requires a certain number of tokens, and then the fee cards will give you the number of tokens to cover it. So they have to kind of balance those trade-offs there. And you can go to the next slide. So takeaways so far from the 3 out of 12 that we've done that have been incorporated here is that the average preferred fee to cover the desired investments or discounts that they want to see in the design is around $5 to $5.50 bidirectional, which equates to approximately $11 inbound, since at the time we thought bidirectional would be the default model, which has kind of shifted since the screening. And that fee is selected to cover investments and discounts. And so the investments that we saw that were the most popular were transit improvements and safety upgrades like transit safety ambassadors. And then the discounts and exemptions that they would want covered under that fee include, for example, low-income transit and driver discounts is the most popular. And then more anecdotally, transparency was a big theme, and wanting to make sure that SFCTA was being really transparent with community members about the details of the policy and any decisions they were making. And fairness also came up a lot, and a need, especially for a fair and equitable fee, especially for low-income folks, some even suggesting no fees for low-income folks. And again, this is all very preliminary findings, but this is something to keep in mind as you think about the screening results.
Cool, thanks, Julia. So we have also, I think as we've talked about before, we initiated the study with a round of one-on-one listening sessions. And so we have reported on the findings from those to the PAC before, but then also since, well, in the spring and more recently, we've also been heard from several different groups that wanted us to come and present to their, in many cases, virtual meetings. And so we've been doing some of that as well. And so this has been kind of reactive outreach so far. And we are now, as Paige is going to talk about later, kicking off a round of more proactive reaching out to stakeholder groups and continuing these kinds of discussions. So, but what we've heard so far from these several different neighborhood groups that we've met with, kind of general themes were desire for increased transit service as part of the program, feeling that from particularly neighborhoods in and around the zone, that there should be exemptions or discounts for people who live within the zone. And then also just interest in some of the benefits, like improving air quality that could happen There was some surprise from some folks about our existing conditions finding that a majority, 75% of the traffic in and around downtown during the peak is actually coming from within San Francisco as opposed to people coming from elsewhere around the region. And lastly, there was some concern, particularly from neighborhoods that are along or straddle the potential borders about where those borders exactly would fall and not wanting them to divide neighborhoods. So that's all feedback that we'll continue to collect and can shape further analysis that we do. So altogether, kind of in terms of where we go from here, I think some of the findings we've had are that the 5100, the larger discounts concept that we came up with best advances the goals given the more equitable outcomes that we found in the screening analysis, and that the co-creation process to date has resulted in more transit discounts, or has indicated interest in more transit discounts. But as Drew was saying, we'd have to, those are kind of on the margin of whether they'd be able to be affordable within the alternatives we looked at revenue-wise. And so anyway, so we're really interested in getting your feedback today to kind of hear about and think about how we move forward with these results together. So moving forward, we are going to have a little time here to, if folks have questions about the analysis itself, then we can answer those kind of in the full session. And we are a little behind, so we may try to keep this a little shorter, to just a few minutes if we can, because we'd really want to make sure to preserve time for breakout sessions where we are hoping we can dive into some questions, some discussion questions we have for you about kind of hearing your feedback about how we should move forward from here. And then after that, we'll have yet more time to have share outs from the stakeholder group, the breakout group discussions, and then some more discussion in the full session. So with that, I will ask Paige to go ahead and start moving folks. I'm sorry, I am skipping ahead here. I'm not supposed to move to the next slide. So I'm sorry. We are on the open mic participant panel because I am going to be looking to see if folks have their hands raised. And I see that Haley had a question. So go ahead, Haley.
Hey, I have two questions. Just wanted to hear a little bit more about how the metric of impact on low-income people was reducing car trips as opposed to increasing their overall cost or the time it takes to get to where they want to go. I think I understood that right, that you were looking, like that one of the major metrics of impact was about, measuring the difference in changing car trips. And then also if you could give a little more insight about how much, like increasing transit by 23%, how much does that cost? Or like, what does that look like? Is that like one more bus or, just so I have a little sense of what 23% is.
Yeah, so first question was about metrics. So the primary metric of the study is focused around vehicle trips, but there are a lot of other metrics too, including costs and travel time. We presented we had to be a little bit selective because there's a lot of information, but we also looked at travel time and kind of went back and forth on whether or not we were going to include it, and ultimately didn't. The high-level takeaway is that without discounts and exemptions, people are experiencing travel time savings, but people who are in the lowest income group are kind of excluded from participating in that savings because they're not driving and taking other alternatives, which tend to be slower. And then your second question was about what is the level of transit service kind of equate to. And so this was based on the vehicle hours of service that are currently operated, including in the peak periods, including what's operated by Muni and other bus service that runs service into downtown San Francisco. And so like a 25% increase in service is, it's a 20-ish% decrease in headways. So you're going to have, you know, a bus that comes every 10 minutes now coming every 8 minutes.
And I might just add to Drew's response about the travel times that with the discounts for low-income drivers, the travel times would be better, would improve.
We've somehow lost you, Colin.
Oh. Well, that's unfortunate.
I was able to hear Colin.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm able to.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. I don't know. Well, who knows? Anyway, with the discount packages, the travel time savings were felt across the board, including low-income travelers. So let's see, we have another hand raised from Robin.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my questions and comments are related to the pandemic. I haven't heard anything about if there's been anything learned during, you know, as people are not traveling. Have you guys learned anything during the pandemic? I've also heard something interesting that, like the mission buses, there's been very little improvement in the travel times with the mission buses because of the red lanes, and so they're not affected by congestion, which suggests that, you know, we'll need more red lanes, you know, as we go forward. So I just want to ask, you know, if there's been any observations or interesting conclusions, you know, during the pandemic. And then I want to just sort of mention this 15% reduction in congestion. You know, the projections now are that as fewer people are taking transit, that there's, you know, as things open up, people will be driving more as an alternative. And I think it's really important that we think about how to reserve street space for other modes, especially bicycling and walking. And also, as restaurants, you know, have to operate outdoors and the sidewalks are taken up, you know, by restaurants, we need to take street space, you know, away from cars so that, you know, more people can either walk or these businesses can expand out into the streets. And so I would suggest that, you know, the aim may be more than 15% reduction over what it was, because we need extra street space for these other modes and other uses. So I just want to put that out there.
Thanks. Yeah, and maybe I'll just give a quick response there that I think, you know, we're definitely going to keep monitoring the pandemic situation as it unfolds. I think, you know, we had identified the 15% based on existing experience in other places with congestion pricing in our previous study, and thought it was a good target to aim for, especially for a pilot. But also keep in mind that it could be something that is tested and modified, and so that's kind of where that came from. But certainly we'll keep monitoring as the pandemic unfolds and recovery as we plan for what it could look like when we would actually potentially implement a congestion pricing concept. We did have a question that got submitted earlier from, let's see if I've lost it here. Let's see, well, actually we had a question from Peter, who also has his hand raised. So Peter, do you want to just go ahead and share your question?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, there were a number of things that I wish you had clarified during the presentation, but there isn't really time to go back to all of those. Now, I wanted to echo somewhat what Robin said, that I don't think we should lock into 15%. And that's something that I've raised, I think, at earlier meetings as well. And I just don't want us to come out of this study, just based on a 15% assumption, because I'm not certain that that's the right level. I also think we're touching on a number of things where we may need higher revenue targets. In particular, I know over the years, we always, the transit professionals, the transit nerds, we always say that transit is cheaper than driving if you consider all of the costs of driving. But I've noticed a lot of times, especially talking to, individuals in lower income groups, that when they're viewing out-of-pocket costs, driving a lot of times is viewed as something that's cheap and transit becomes too expensive. And I think, that's something that's reflected in the elasticity that we seem to see, the price elasticity in some of your comparisons on lower income groups. And it makes me think that it's really essential as part of this that we have broadened transit subsidies for low-income populations, and this is something that MTA now has more than most other operators, but even so, it's not as extensive as it should be. And certainly those low-income subsidies don't extend to regional carriers, that also are part of the equation. So I think it's really important that we make sure in our revenue projections that we have a model that raises enough revenue, not just for the amount of transit service that needs to be provided, but also for some of the transit subsidies for lower income riders that I think are absolutely essential as part of this if we're trying, especially when we're increasing the costs of driving. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Are there other questions? And I do want to remind folks, we're going to try to keep this section to just questions about the analysis and save feedback for the next couple, breakout groups and subsequent discussion. So are there other questions? I see that we had a question, it looks like, in the chat from Stephen about whether congestion pricing will be employed in recessions when small businesses are already vulnerable. And I think this gets to, from a different angle, the question that Robin had raised about kind of when we'd be doing this and what the conditions would be. I think we would see congestion pricing as something that could be implemented as part of a recovery. I mean, generally congestion goes down during recessions, and it comes back during times when the economy is in better shape. So it's likely something that would be we would want to have as part of a recovery. it's also something that we know that congestion does, decrease people's desire of going into congested areas. So it may be something that could in some ways help businesses in that way as well. And then, let's see, I also see that Tiffany has her hand raised. Go ahead, Tiffany. Let me try unmuting you again here.
Hi, Colin.
Go ahead.
Tiffany from SF Environment. I'm curious about the vehicle trip reduction analyses on pages, I guess it was like 31 through 35 or so. How can you speak a little bit more as to how they were calculated in terms of salary bands and the percentage of trips being reduced? Because some of the numbers, they seem like kind of, they're all kind of like in the same ballpark, except for obviously the very low income under the more discounts scenario. So I'm just trying to understand like how much to take this into consideration and what's the level of confidence here as to consumer behavior.
Yeah, Drew, do you want to help answer that?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Hi, Drew.
Hi.
I don't know if folks can hear me, but I am having, this does not seem to be working for me. I'm going to leave and rejoin.
Okay, well, I can hopefully help answer the question from Drew. I'm going to just flip back to slide 35. So these are the income groups based on area median income. And I think the previous slides showed you the categories for a family of four that represents. And so this is based on the model results. And the basic idea here is that with a zero discount scenario on the left here, the general trend is that because a price is going to be, people with higher incomes are going to be less sensitive to the price, then their vehicle trips reduce less. In other words, people with higher incomes don't feel the incentive as much to shift from driving to other ways of getting around. And people at the lowest income groups, the fee is, hits them hardest essentially because they are most budget constrained. And so they are most likely to make trade-offs, such as having a longer trip to shift to a different mode. And so then as we move towards having more discounts, I think probably the clearest case is the one on the far right with the 50% for low and 100% for very low income discount, where the trips are now more reduced because the base price has to be higher for the moderate to high income ranges. But because of the discounts, there's less, the low income groups are feeling that incentive less strongly. Of course, they already drive at much lower rates than people at the high income rates. So it's actually sort of evening the curve in terms of who's driving a little bit more. Does that help answer your question, Tiffany?
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just curious, because of COVID, like, will we have to redo the assumptions in the model? Because I could see how, perception of safety will completely transform, and like this diagram just like no longer holds true in a post-COVID world. Like that 15%, like the arrows are just like gonna shrink back up because people are just too scared to go downtown any other way besides a car.
Well, so I think, things are definitely going to be probably quite different until there's a vaccine. And we're going to have to test some different scenarios. I mean, it's true that this is all, this analysis is based on 2019 because we need a congested year to use for our analysis, basically. I mean, we wouldn't, you know, a program like this would not make sense if there's no congestion on the streets, because we're in the middle of the pieces of the pandemic and recession that we've seen. So, but as we recover, we're going to be having to monitor what conditions are looking like. And our thought is that, you know, the comparison of different kinds of scenarios is likely to hold true just in terms of kind of what's more effective than something else in meeting our goals. But we're going to have to do some sensitivity testing, and the Drew's team is also separately working on some analysis of different scenarios we could see ourselves in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're going to take one more question here. I see that JR has his hand raised, and then move to breakouts because we want to make sure we have plenty of time for those.
Hey, thank you.
JR.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of sensitivity analysis. We play with a lot of variables, but the one thing that's been static through this analysis has been the size and location of the cordon zone. How sensitive is this analysis to changes in the cordoning?
So a different cordon is something that we have not tested yet, and it is something that we that we do plan to test. What we have wanted to do is, unfortunately, we had to delay, you know, a lot of the outreach that we've done. So what we've wanted to do is base an alternate cordon analysis on outreach to more stakeholder groups, so that we can kind of develop, you know, what that might look like on different edges. So that is still a pending piece of work, but that's a good point. Yes, we, you know, we've used 2010 so far as kind of a placeholder, but we will definitely need to look at the feasibility of doing something else that would address some of the concerns that we've heard already and others that we may potentially hear as we continue talking to folks. Okay, well, thanks so much for all these questions. I do want to move us on to breakouts because I'm hoping there will be more great discussion there. And so let's see, let's move forward here. So at this point, I think Paige will be moving folks into the breakout sessions.
Yes, I will. Everybody hold tight. I will open the rooms, and I might have to do some adjustments after. Some folks have been coming in and out, I see. So we're just going to go ahead now. And just so members of the public know, you can hang tight in the main room here, and I will share a feedback form, and it has the questions that we are going to be discussing in the breakout rooms. So we'd appreciate your feedback on this feedback form. And then the pack will reconvene as a larger group in about 15, 20 minutes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us in the breakout sessions. Paige, is everybody back, I assume?
Yes.
Great. So at this point, we have a little time here for share outs from each session. So let's start with group number 1, which is actually my group. Eric, do you want to, as our illustrious note taker, give us the highlights of the group's discussion?
Sure. So we were not able to get to all 4 questions. We've got a lot of our focus on the first question, people giving their initial reactions. They were kind of came from a lot of different angles and perspectives. Just to try to summarize though, a lot of concern in our group about discounts, making sure to keep that top of mind in developing any policy. Also, someone had mentioned the potential for sticker shock with regards to any fee linked to congestion pricing. Concern about protecting congestion pricing funds, making sure that they go to transit and not for other uses. And questions about whether there might be political roadblocks to advancing a congestion pricing plan. Also concerned that we have enough revenue generated from this program for transit discounts. Sorry, we did get to the 4th question very briefly, where we ask, what do you want to know from community members to help make decisions about these trade-offs? And someone had mentioned, make sure that in outreach we get a nuanced understanding of what people want to see.
Thanks, Eric. Is there anybody from group 1 who wants to raise your hand and add anything if you think there was something that Eric missed? The key point? Seeing none. Okay. Then let's move on to group 2. And who is that? It looks like Brooke was the facilitator there. Who wants to report out from group 2?
Yeah. Paisley, are you able to pick this one?
Sure.
Thanks. I apologize, Pyra. We got cut off right at the end and they didn't flag that for folks, but thanks, Paisley.
Yeah, so I think a lot of our discussion was related to this, this project now happening in a post-COVID world and what that means. So we talked a lot about what the analysis assumes and how that's being updated, and got up to speed on the new modeling that's underway that's not ready yet. We are continuing to do outreach with an eye towards we're continuing to do remote co-creation with an eye towards COVID, talking about what this new reality means to people and how that impacts their feelings about this project. And then there were some varying opinions about the discounts. Well, some people felt it was really important to even increase subsidies to low and very low income folks. Other folks feel like pollution knows no demographics, so everybody should be in this and everybody should be equally paying for it. Any other group 2 folks want to add on to this? All right, we'll have a chance for group discussion afterwards.
Great, thanks, Paisley. And so moving on to group 3. Who wants to report out from group 3? And that was Rachel's facilitation group.
I guess I could do it. So some of the points raised are people were wondering what are the economic impacts of this. We're wondering if less trips are going to be made to businesses or less trips in general. And then someone else was wondering if people were to avoid the peak period fee, it might raise congestion at a different time when people were trying to avoid commuting at that peak period time to avoid the fee. And then someone had a question about, from their experience, they've heard low-income workers usually share trips together, like there are 2 or 3 low-income workers per car, and they're wondering how we account for that in our studies. And then someone else was just hoping to geek out more on the underlying data and had a question about how we calculate AMI and what percentage of drivers fit in which group.
Great. Thanks. And then last group, group 4. Who wants to report out there from group Julia facilitated?
Yeah, I can share. So our group, we thought that largely speaking, inbound seemed to make the most sense, but also curiosity too around how can we design the policy so that it's can be iterated on based off of the data that we're getting in. And so that was mentioned, and then also a desire to make sure that we are really putting in more work right now to reach small businesses in the zone and just let them know that this is happening, and also, what is their thoughts about this, especially given the economic impact they've had already. And then in terms of reactions to the $10 to $12 base price that's emerging from this study, some folks said that, that is an appropriate level given just the cost of San Francisco and that being the same price as lunch, or if you look at the cost of BART, this is a high enough price to deter folks from coming in. But then also on the other side, it seems high for low-income residents of Chinatown, for example. As well as for businesses who maybe are going to be more reliant on drivers and could put businesses out of business or cost them.
Okay, thanks everyone. So now we have a few minutes for any further discussion. If people want to have further thoughts that either weren't covered or maybe synthesize thoughts from what you're hearing from the different breakout groups. Robin, I see your hand is raised, so go ahead. And I'm not sure.
I think I just managed to unmute myself. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. I can hear you.
So I just want to reiterate something I said in our group, and that is about the subsidies. I'm really concerned about the subsidies because cars are already subsidized enough. Recently Jeffrey Tumlin was speaking and he made the point, somebody gets on a muni bus and for a 2 by 2 foot space, they pay $3. But if you get in your car and take up a space on the street, you don't pay anything for it. So already we're subsidizing driving, and we're all subsidizing driving. Cars compromise our health, compromise our safety, climate change, you just go on and on and on. You know, and if anybody has read Don Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking, you know, you see how much they're subsidized. So if somebody has, you know, if a low income person has to drive because of work, then their employer should subsidize them. But no, I don't think you should ask this, you know, the general public to subsidize those trips any more than they're already being subsidized. So so that's one thing I wanted to just make the point. And then also, as a resident of Hayes Valley, I've said this before, you know, we're already overwhelmed with traffic here. We've got major arterials crisscrossing the neighborhood: Oak, Fell, Franklin, Goff, Octavia, Market, Laguna. And so I'm very concerned about the boundaries of the congestion pricing area, you know, and spill over into this neighborhood. We just can't take it anymore. So I just want to put that out there to make sure that you were included in the boundary, because we're, like I said, we're already totally overwhelmed by traffic here. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Robin. And I see that JR, you've got your hand raised, so go ahead.
Thank you. We had some conversation about the transit improvements and how the incremental dollars would be used. And, you know, it was clarified to us that the increase in, you know, headways or increase in rolling stock was necessary to accommodate the additional demand on transit. But the one idea that came out of this was, okay, well, if we don't have the ability to do the capital projects that may make things more efficiently, you know, that doesn't mean that we can't reprioritize existing budget, not the incremental dollars, but existing budget to make sure that we get the most bang for the buck out of what will be coming out of congestion pricing. And so it seems important for anything going forward to be a package deal that includes, you know, existing budgetary dollars and resources to make sure that we get the absolute best out of what we get out of the incremental dollars from congestion pricing.
Great. That's thanks for the thought there. We can think about that also as we think about other things we can do with the revenue from program. Mario, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. And I guess it repeats itself, too, because the last time an advisory committee was set up for this was in 2008, and they walked into a recession. And I hope you're wrong, but history is repeating itself. So your timing's impeccable. Next time you set one of these up, I'm going to anticipate a recession. So aside from the comedy, we have to keep in mind that too. Now there's the political will, there's a public will, there's a big struggle with the city's budget, and people are pushing back. There's a momentum going out there. And as I said in our group meeting as well too, is that if we're going to have triggers, we may not see any triggers for quite some time once this is implemented, depending. I know it could take 3 or 4 years for this to implement, but it could take, 4 or 5 years for us to dig ourselves out of a recession. And this one's going to be quite different because of the social distancing, the telecommuting. I have a feeling malls and downtown are going to have serious issues. And that sweet spot, that whole spot of your congestion area, I have a feeling you're going to have a lot of long-term vacancies there. So, we just have to keep an open mind and keep that in mind. As I said in our small group meeting, let's not go spending any of that money yet, because we don't know if it'll be actually coming in for quite some time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we can certainly agree that we don't know exactly what the future holds and kind of what the timeline for getting out of this recession will be. I don't see any other hands raised. There was a question from Peter that he's brought up a couple times in chats about asking Drew if we could just clarify a little bit more what the difference between peak direction and inbound pricing is, and then maybe from there we can move into public comment.
So
quick clarification on inbound versus bidirectional pricing is that an inbound cordon charge you pay when you enter the zone. Bidirectional pricing you pay when you enter and leave the zone. I also wanted to take this opportunity to share with you guys, hopefully one of my colleagues will post this in the chat window, but we've been tracking congestion through the shelter-in-place era, and I've just put the link in the side. And what you see is that there was like a very sharp increase in speeds when shelter-in-place started, and speeds today are still higher than they were prior to shelter-in-place, but they've been consistently and steadily heading back down to where we've lost about 2/3 of the speed gain in the PM peak period already, which is surprising to say the least, given how little travel is still going on.
Great. Thanks, Drew. And I think we are, Paige, how are we doing on time here?
Time for some public comment.
Okay. I know we have a couple more questions from PAC members. Maybe we can see if we have public comment and then come back if there is time. Does that make sense?
Sounds good.
Cool. Okay, thanks, and apologies. I know this is a great topic to keep talking about. So let's see if we have any public comment. If folks could raise your hand. And don't see any hands raised.
Howard is raising his hand.
Great. I don't know why that doesn't show up in my window. Thank you. Howard, go ahead.
If you unmute me, I wrote down some questions like in chat, but I don't know how they get delivered. So one question was, have you considered how many low-income drivers will be TNC drivers? Their riders are probably not low-income. How much of the San Francisco traffic occurs during the peak? I mean, if shoppers going down the middle of the day, is that the San Francisco traffic or is it commuters? We should know that. Why not consider a higher level of reduction as an alternate? This is based on what Peter said. You could go for 15 and do right in parallel while you're doing all this work, go for 20 or 25 and see what the difference in congestion fee will be. And have you included changes in the price of parking, which will follow increases or decreases in driving? Muni makes a significant amount of money from parking. And if you really cut down, you may think you're cutting down congestion. You may be cutting down.
1 minute is up.
Muni will lose more than they make through all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Drew, do you want to add a quick response to any of that? I know we are very short on time here.
I don't. Well, I guess the one thing that I will quickly respond to is that our analysis for this project, we did actually look at the income distributions of people using TNCs, but not people driving TNCs, and found that there are actually people kind of across the income spectrum who are using them. So thank you for those
Great.
comments and questions.
Yeah, thank you. And we also had a public comment that came in earlier from Erin Ferguson asking about whether the inbound cost would vary by time of day at all or by week, and maybe I could just quickly answer that. We did not, so the main scenario we've been looking at is just an inbound fee that would be during the peak periods in the morning and evening. We did also look at a daily fee where it would just be a flat fee all day long, and that would just be weekdays only as well. But the peak period only fee had lower costs in order to achieve our 15% peak period for production goal. So that's the one we suggested moving forward with. Are there any further public comments? And if not, we will go back to, we have time for PAC discussion here.
And to move on to the outreach presentation.
Yes, okay, yes, I see. I apologize. It is now time to turn it over to Paige for a brief presentation about outreach coming up. And then there's another comment period at the end. And we can also take any other comments if we have a couple of minutes at the end at that point. So again, apologies for not getting to everyone here, but we do want to let you know what outreach is coming up. So I will share my screen here, and Paige, go ahead.
So shortly after our workshop in the Bayview, as we mentioned, the police order was issued, so we paused our outreach to reassess how we might move forward in a way that leads with equity and is also safe and socially distanced. So this pause also resulted in us extending our first major outreach group into the fall. So some of the groups that we consulted with as we updated our outreach plan included policy advisory committee members, future co-creation workshop co-hosts, and members of our board. The main takeaway from these meetings was to move forward with outreach for the study, given the high likelihood that congestion and its related impacts will return as the economy rebounds. We also, just last week, got authorization from our board to increase our consultant contract to support more outreach. And additionally, we've been participating in a citywide agency public engagement network, and we've been having discussions with our equitable outreach consultants to keep on top of best practices as we adapt our outreach for a socially distant future. So we had two main challenges in updating our outreach plan. One is, how can we continue to have in-depth collaborative conversations with community members when we can no longer host co-creation workshops in person? And the second main challenge was, how can we reach communities of concern, populations of low-income individuals, people of color, and seniors, many of whom have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and some of whom may have less access to digital means of communication. So today I'll share some strategies that we plan on using and that we are exploring using, and we welcome your feedback. So I'll first share a list of engagement tools that we're looking to use to meet people where they are. And the first one you've heard a lot about is remote co-creation workshops. And just to dive a little deeper into what that looks like, we've held 3 in person and out of a total of 12. So we are now working with community-based organizations to plan the remaining workshops remotely. And under this model, participants receive physical kits in the mail and join a call or webinar with our staff to go through the workshop. Collaboration with household members is encouraged, and similar to the in-person co-creation model, participants receive compensation for their time via a Visa gift card. And we'll be adapting the workshops based on the needs of each community. This includes hosting workshops in language and making sure the timing is right. We've learned that while some communities are open to conducting workshops now, others have been hard hit by the pandemic and have requested that we wait a few months before conducting workshops with them. And so to date, we've conducted a few pilot remote workshops with Chinese newcomers and APA family support services, and these workshops went well. So additional engagement tools that we plan on using which can all be multilingual, are phone calls and SMS texting. So with over 90% of the San Francisco population as a whole having smartphone access, we know that those rates are lower among seniors and people with low incomes. And for that reason, we've incorporated tools like SMS outreach and phone calls. And this method would entail a text opt-in number and call-in number being shared via flyers, advertisements, and through community organizations with an incentive to get involved. Another tool is a digital and telephone town hall where our project team presents an overview of the study and people can tune in on their computer or on their phone where they can also provide feedback. And virtual presentations, where our project team reaches out to community organizations and schedules a time to present. And a quick plug here, if your organization would like us to present, please let us know and we will put something on the schedule. And so how are we going to get the word out about all of those opportunities to engage? One publicity tactic that we're looking into includes distribution of printed materials like flyers and door hangers. These materials would feature the text opt-in number and call-in number that I mentioned earlier. And a few examples of ways we might distribute these include through food deliveries, at laundromats, healthcare centers, barbershops, affordable housing establishments, senior centers, and more. In-language advertising is another publicity tactic that is on our list. A few examples include using radio stations, ethnic media, and advertising at places like gas stations, on advertisement screens, on TV screens and cabs, and more. And finally, we'll also be working with community organizations to help get the word out. And these are just some of the main ways that we are looking to reach people from a remote perspective as the study progresses. And of course, we'll also be using tactics like social media and e-newsletters to get the word out. And with that, we welcome your questions, ideas, and input.
I am muted. I see a few hands raised. Haley, do you want to go ahead?
That was just my question about whether it was peak period or not.
Great. Okay. Do others have questions on this item? Robin, your hand is raised. Do you have a question on the outreach item here?
I do not. It's about a comment that Drew made earlier, so I can wait.
Okay. Check if anyone has any questions on this, on outreach first. Okay. Okay, we have about 1 minute here. Robin, do you want to just go ahead with your question on the last item? Your hand is raised, and then in a minute we will move on here. Or if not, we can go ahead to public comment. Okay. I think we should proceed to.
I'm sorry, Drew, Susan Collins?
Yeah, go ahead. We have just a minute here.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. So just real quick, you know, Drew made the comment about speeds increasing during, you know, the pandemic and so forth. And I just want to, again, make the point, you know, from a bicyclist perspective, congestion is not always bad because it slows down traffic. And I've personally experienced this now with very few cars on the road, that people are driving very, very fast. And it's actually in some cases much more dangerous now to bicycle around than it was when there was a lot of congestion. So I just want to put that out there that you know, it's the important thing is to slow down the traffic. Just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So then the very last thing before we have our last public comment period is just our schedule moving forward. So we are now in this step 4 phase as we try to define our narrower set of alternatives, and we'll be doing the outreach Paige was talking about through the summer and into the early fall, and then we'll be doing another round of analysis. Our next scheduled PAC meeting is in October, where we will, based on the feedback we hear from outreach, we'll bring to you a set of proposed narrowed down scenarios for further analysis and consideration. And then we are going to try to get from there to a recommendation in the spring. So that is all except for public comment. So I will look for if there are any hands raised for public comment. And if there are any that I am not seeing again, other folks on the team could let me know. That would be great.
Yeah, Colin, I have a question in about how to reach drivers specifically. So in our list of outreach ideas, one of the actions that we had was advertising at gas stations. And the commenter added the idea of advertising at supermarkets, which is something that we've definitely been talking about. And we're trying to figure out if there are ways that we can safely safely flyer from a social distance at the same time. But we do, through our general outreach, know that we have been reaching a lot of people who primarily drive as one of their main modes or their main mode through the discussions that we've been having. And if you have any additional ideas to reach out to drivers, please do let us know. One additional strategy that we have on our former outreach plan was to reach out to SFMTA parking garages, and I believe that is still something that we can do. And basically, the SFMTA, we'll be able to collaborate with them to connect to the people who are parking in their garages.
Great, thanks for that. A good question, and thanks, Paige, for the answer. Any other public comment folks want to add? All right, I'm not seeing any hands. Paige, any other things coming into you via chat?
No, not that I see.
Okay. Well, in that case, we can conclude this meeting. I'll be honest, I was a little nervous about the time, so apologies for cutting off discussion earlier, but we have managed to end on time. So, and I think we have also had a really good discussion, got a lot of really good feedback, particularly in the feedback or the breakout groups. So thanks so much for everyone for participating. And as always, of course, feel free to get in touch with us if you have further thoughts you'd want to share. We will attempt to gather everything that's been shared in the chat and also notes from the meeting and make sure that they are posted. So thanks, and we'll also probably be in, we will be in touch in order also to start setting up outreach with different stakeholder groups, including the folks that, that you all represent as well. So we do plan to be in touch between now and October, and of course you'll get any key updates in the meantime as well. So thanks again for joining us tonight, and really appreciate the feedback and your time. So have a good night.